In this module, we'll talk about how important it is for an English language classroom to be sensitive to different rhetorical conventions and cultural practices. When we observe the way people speak in the outer circle and expanding circle countries and inner circle countries, we see that there's a lot of difference in the rhetorical conventions. By rhetorical conventions, we mean the conventions for formal speech or writing, or when you use speech or writing for a particular purpose or with a particular intention. People in the inner circle countries, the native English speaking countries, their speech is more goal oriented. For example, they would come straight to the point and they would get engaged, they will be involved in a conversation with somebody only when they have purpose. Whereas in the outer and expanding circle countries, in these cultures, people tend to be a little indirect. Instead of coming straight to the point or having a conversation with somebody only when there's a reason, they would either be indirect in stating their purpose or would still get involved in a conversation with somebody when they do not really have a very clear-cut purpose. Similarly, in the West, in the inner circle countries, the conventions of rhetoric are purely utilitarian. For example, you will have a conversation with somebody only when there's a practical purpose. You will not have a conversation with somebody only by way of digression or by way of passing time. So instead of coming straight to the point, instead of having extremely goal-oriented conversations, the people in the outer and expanding circles are more indirect, and they would also, before coming to the point, talk about other things, digress from the main point. So this is one way in which the rhetorical conventions are different in the inner and outer circle countries. These differences in the rhetorical conventions are likely to cause a lot of misunderstanding and sometimes misinterpretations. For example, several experts and researchers quote incidents from conversations between native English speakers and non-native English speakers where these differences have caused some misunderstanding. For example, a professor from a native English speaking country visiting China, his Chinese guide, after he had given some lectures, offered him to take some rest or asked him if he was tired or if he wanted to take some rest. The professor took it as, in fact, he was offended by such an offer, thinking that probably he did not deliver his lectures very well, and that is why the Chinese guide or assistant thinks that he is tired. So these differences in conventions can cause a lot of misunderstanding. As in this case, the Chinese assistant was only being polite, as it's a convention in Chinese culture to ask somebody if they were tired or if they wanted to take some rest. So what is needed is sensitivity to different conventions, and these conventions can be created through teaching materials and practices. So this sensitivity can be created in the English language classroom with the help of teaching materials. We need to create materials which represent not only native English speakers but also the cultural practices and rhetorical conventions of non-native English speakers to raise awareness about these different cultural and rhetorical conventions. Similarly, there's a lot of difference in discourse strategies. The discourse strategies used by the native English speakers and the non-native English speakers. And world Englishes, wherever people in the outer and expanding circle countries use English, their use of the English language shows traces of these cultural influences, the cultural influence from the communities that they belong to. So what we see in the world Englishes is the use of local discourse strategies which are transplanted to the use of English. So these local discourse strategies, what to say first, what to say next, how to start a conversation, how to start a piece of writing, how to end it, all these discourse strategies from local languages are then transplanted to the use of English by the speakers of English in the outer and expanding circle countries. Now, it is believed that an English language classroom should be a place to impart knowledge about different cultures. But what we see is that the English language classrooms have become a site for imparting knowledge only about Anglo-American cultures. Because most of the teaching materials and the textbooks, they are published by the publishers in native English speaking countries, inner circle countries, and they represent only the cultures and practices of native English speaking countries. This has resulted in the submerging of local cultures and conventions. For example, if, let's say, in Pakistan, a book is being used all over the country or in a large number of private schools, which represents only a native English speaking culture, American culture, British culture, when will children become aware of, or how will they value their own culture? So these practices in English language teaching have resulted in a submerging of the local cultures, not only in Pakistan but in other parts of the world, in outer and expanding circles. Classroom, in fact, has to be a place where these differences are embraced, where the innovations that the non-native English speakers make in the English language, where they use the English language to perform functions which are new to the English language, which are unique to their own culture. So English and English language classroom should embrace all these innovations. But what we see is that these innovations are not fully embraced, they are discouraged, because most of the representations that we see in English language textbooks and materials are that of native English cultures. So what is needed is a recognition of world Englishes, which is likely to make people, students, teachers sensitive to different cultures. So what we need is the use of the English language classrooms to make people sensitive to different cultural practices and rhetorical conventions, so that people from other parts of the world embrace each other's culture and the innovations which are made in the use of the English language.